Hundreds of newspapers criticized the president today in his saying that the press is the enemy. Hundreds. But what I don't think that they realize is that they merely just prove the argument that people think that they're working in cahoots and they're not objective.
So by working all together,
they work against their whole view. It's insane. I mean, the average person thinks that the press, I don't think that the press is the enemy of the people, but they think that the press is no longer objective.
Yeah, well, we've said it before. I mean, I don't care that they're critical of Trump. I just want them to have the same standard for every politician, regardless of political party. And then it's fine, because then you know they're
right down
the same criticism, the same stuff, the same garbage is going each one. So that's fine. I mean, that's actually helpful if they do that the same thing for everybody.
Right.
But you can't say, Trump is terrible because he criticizes the CIA or the FBI. Any criticism of the FBI, he's like, well, you're disparaging the FBI
American
and integrity.
Yeah.
And then you have Cuomo, the governor, say America has never been a great country.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Yes.
By the way, the FBI is a part of the United States.
Right.
So you can't criticize the FBI, but you can criticize every American.
You can't criticize the parts.
Yeah.
But you can criticize the whole.
Unless those parts are police officers. And you can criticize
those.
So it's just such a useless. It's a political standard, not a moral standard.
We're an insane time.
The standard of criticism is purely political. It's not a moral or ethical standard. If they were jumping on him for criticizing the FBI, and they jumped on everybody regardless for the same thing, regardless of the party for the same thing, that'd be fine. Then you, the reader, would know. Okay, this is their consistent criticism.
Right.
They're evaluating, and you can read it and then evaluate. Do I accept this or not? But when it's different criteria based on the political affiliation, there's no way as a reader to be able to trust. Okay, how should I evaluate? Let me watch because I can silence it. See how I silence that? Just boom.
Yeah, is that how that rolls?
Yeah, just silence
that bad boy. That's Dick Tracy stuff.
Yeah, that's nobody important anyway. That's probably some stupid
telemarketer calling you for some dental plan that you don't need.
Don't hang up. This is really an important phone call.
So there's,
trust me, if that's what you start with, it's not.
But you know what I do? I saw this one guy. I don't know. This guy's a comedian. He's from England or someplace like that. And he totally plays on the Nigerian, check scammer people. And what he does is he gets them on the phone and he acts like he's going to send them money. But he says, I want the toaster first.
Yeah.
And he just runs the game so that they get frustrated dealing with him. But he says I will do nothing. I will send you no money unless I get my red toaster. So he does this the whole time and they look really foolish. So whenever they call here, I ask for the red toaster.
Oh, dear. I don't even get. I mean, it's always like a computer, so you gotta do all the stuff.
I'm looking for the red toaster. So if you don't, so they get on the phone. I say, the last guy promised me a toaster, and they're like, what? I said, yeah, I'm not going to sign anything. I'm not going to do anything until you promise me you're going to send me the toaster. And then what kind of toaster? And then I want the 4-slice red toaster, and then we just go on from there. Until they get bored.
Bagel toasters, because my boys eat bagels all the time.
It's funny. I mean, it's just they're just rude, man.
Yeah, that's it. You ever see they have one that has hot dog buns now, and you can stick the hot dogs in it. You have 4 hot dogs and 4 hot dog bun slots. So you put it down, it cooks your hot dogs and does your buns, and then it's all in the whole thing. So you should ask for that one.
I need to find out what that number is. Who makes that?
Probably Cuisinart. Who knows? I just saw that thing.
This is one of those days. This is one of those days.
You're tired, aren't you?
No, I just got a headache.
I am, man.
I just got a headache. But this is a good topic we're going to talk about today.
Well, yeah, we never really... Well, okay. So here's the thing is we don't always think about, here's the topic we're going to do ahead of time. Today we decided to do it. And we have this great plan. Print out some quotes from a book that both Leo and I came across. Who's prepared?
I'm prepared. I remember. I know everything. I just remember what we're going to talk about.
Well, why don't you? Here's the name of the book we want to look at. Actually, we're just going to look at some key concepts, and I have 4 quotes that I thought were interesting from a book that just came out in 2018. Right? For some reason, the date's not on my quote here. Anyway, it's by a Yale law professor, James Whitman. and the title of his book is Hitler's American Model.
Hmm.
And so he is looking at the premise of the book is. Well, why don't you summarize a little bit of the premise? If you
Premise of the book is this writer takes a look at 1930s Germany and at the inception of the Nazi Party and how they used the American system in the 1930s to form their eventual Nazi party platform, through which and by which they began to instituted the Nuremberg laws, through which they began to crush the Jews in Germany.
Yeah.
And
so
we're
he's a lawyer looking at the legal system in the United States that was discriminatory against blacks and other minorities, and saying how that sort of inspired some of the German laws and the Nazi Party.
He's not saying that they inspired it. He's saying that they literally lifted it from 1930s America and took it to Germany and used it in Germany. He's saying that they literally lifted it from 1930s America, which to both of us is just a fascinating concept. Number one, because if it's true, how come we never heard of that before? How come we never even that was never talked about before? And I mean, the Germans, the Nazis, get derision for, and rightfully so, for their conduct in the 1930s leading up to World War II and their ultimate defeat in World War II and what we found is the Holocaust. But what we didn't realize is that the ideological structure came from our own country, which is like, what do you
I think that's, we'll get into it a little bit. I think his book is focused on the legal connections.
Sure.
I think there's some deeper philosophical worldview issues that come into play that were really what made those laws even palatable.
Draconian.
But I don't know how much, and I haven't read the whole book yet.
Right.
Just key parts.
Just
so
key
I'm curious
parts.
how far of the worldview philosophy that undergirds that, because I've been doing a lot of reading and writing on that. I have an article I've been working on in that area. So this was really interesting to me. I'll start us with one quote here, and you tell me, because you might have read this one yet too. So this is again from James Whitman's book, Hitler's American Model. He says this. Now he's Krieger's influential 1934 article. So I'm going to cite a bunch of people you don't know and out of quote, but we'll get to the substance of it. So he's saying this influential 1934 article by a guy named Krieger explained that it was because the ruling race in America had to work to prevent black, quote-unquote, influence that American lawyers had developed covert legal subterfuges to deprive the black population of full political rights despite their national constitutionality guaranteed citizenship. The article went into considerable detail about how these subterfuges functioned and expressed cautious optimism that America would eventually move toward a more, quote-unquote, open form of legal racism. If the kind being developed at home in Germany, Sahn similarly surveyed the techniques for the deprivation of black political rights, which were designed to, quote, to depress the political influence of the Negroes to a minimum, end quote, in the southern states. So, did you happen to...
Oh, I did read. As a matter of fact, I was reading it just before I came here.
Yeah. So the premise of that, I'll set it up and then you kind of knock it down a little bit. So he's saying, to follow the quote, he's really saying, look, so even though racism was illegal, the racists, the Southerners, and those outside the South, obviously, but strong Democrats, essentially, in the South. He doesn't say Democrats, but it's really Democrats in the South. Basically had these sort of, secret sort of ways to implement the laws that would still allow them to, suppress blacks and oppress blacks, hoping that down the road they could be more overt in their oppression. Right. That's what he's arguing. It is his examination of the law.
Right, because at this point, the writer is saying that the Nazis were already, they had already gone farther with the law in Germany than did in America. In America, because there were laws on the books that made blacks full citizens, so they could not be open with the implementation of these laws because they would be unconstitutional. So the lawyers schemed ways through which to institute these quote unquote unofficial laws or rules that militated against black agency in America. The hope was, as Joe said, that they would be able to become more open with it, as the Germans did, and they fortunately they weren't. But the interesting thing about the author is we know who's in power at the timing of this, and and there's a particular political party that was in power at the timing of all of this, and Arthur really never goes on to name them. But, because we know what time in history it was and the people that he's talking about, we know who they were. It's just a very fascinating thing that these people were so persistent in their racism that they were willing to institute laws, even those that were not on the books, in order to oppress black agency in the South and in America. And it's just crazy.
Yeah. Well, I think what he doesn't get into this so far, because these quotes will get into sort of how it was implemented. The arguments that they use are really interesting. But prior to this, in the 1930s, this has been a lot of the research I've been focused on lately, this last few months, actually. But it's interesting to see the foundation laid within essentially the Darwinian naturalist worldview that was undergirding all it dominated the science of the day. Not that it created it. I mean, Darwinian science isn't inherently racism,
right.
But the way it worked itself out in the culture was it was used to justify a lot of it. So, have you ever heard of Oda Benga?
I have not.
Okay. So, in the early 1900s, it was very common they had human zoos. You ever heard of human zoos?
I've heard of that.
Yeah, they actually had human zoos. Not just, there was really in Europe is where there were a lot of them at, but then it sort of was so popular and used there. Americans also had some of these human zoos where they put exhibits of human beings. And specifically, there was a guy who happened to be a former missionary to the Congo, brought back this Congolese pygmy guy named Otabenga.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
And he brought him back, put him on the St. Louis World's Fair on display, then basically gave him to the Bronx Zoo in New York, and they put him in the monkey house on display with the monkeys. And he was in there like holding little chimpanzees up, and they bring hundreds of people come in every day to see this, this lower evolved species. And in Darwinian ideas, it was a lower form of the species. So it was okay to do that. It was okay to display him in the monkey house because he was sort of this missing link between man and ape anyway. It's why to this day, I mean, it's not just a black thing whenever people say, equate the charge of blacks, associated with monkeys or apes or whatever, is such an offensive thing. All humans were thought to be related, but it's because specifically blacks were said to be closer to that common connection is made in the minds. And that's why, when people I think, what's a gal who said, the politician, she's a monkey or an ape or she's such a gorilla or something like that.
Oh, was that Trump?
Oh, I'll give you one I remember. There was a tennis announcer. Apparently in the world of tennis, this happened last year. Like Andre Agassi, he was like an aggressive baseline player back in the 90s, and he was a very aggressive
very athletic guy.
He charged the net, and he was aggressive at the baseline. He had a very specific style of play. His aggressive style was called sort of guerrilla tennis.
I know.
Well, this announcer last year said Venus, I think Williams, she said, oh man, she plays guerrilla tennis.
Not GORGUE.
Like guerrilla warfare.
Like guerrilla warfare.
Because it was the style of tennis. Right. But it had been around for decades in that usage.
But the term...
But he used it for her.
Right.
He got fired from ESPN.
He did.
Because he used that.
But see, that's just not, he wasn't even using the word gorilla, GORILLA.
Yes.
He was using the word gorilla as in a jungle fighter, GUERILLA, which is
good spelling,
I know it's from the 80s, the Sandinista.
Yeah, guerrilla warfare.
Guerrilla warfare from that
was applied to
thing.
tennis for people to play that in the game.
Right.
So even though he did that, it was so.
See, he made the mistake. He made the mistake of thinking that the people that he was working with weren't racist. That's the mistake he made.
There's a charge. There's an understanding that charge is not. It doesn't land. It does land. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Because see, but I get though
that's
the
like
sensitivity.
last year. It's like the year before last when they were pulling down the Confederate statues, and the guy Robert E. Lee, the Chinese guy named Robert E. Lee.
Oh yeah. ESPN guy, his name is Robert
ESPN guy,
E. Lee.
they didn't let him go down south because his name is Robert E. Lee.
Even though he's an Asian,
even though he's Chinese
guy, Chinese
it's
descent.
insane. It's insane. But
I do get, but looking at like the history of something like Otobenga,
right,
and what was done to blacks specifically. I mean, you've got like Francis Crick, you've got Huxley back in the early 1900s, who was actually promoting experiments where they try to impregnate a black woman with ape semen, or they try to reverse it whatever way they could, but they were trying to get, because they believed that blacks were so much closer to the apes that they could prove that there's this hybridization
insane,
possible,
insane
thus
people.
prove that they're the same species. So
people.
when you look at that history, you can see why that's such a sensitive, and rightly, and I think in the sense it is rightly so, a very sensitive thing. That doesn't mean we shouldn't use wisdom and discerning, like a Chinese guy named Robert E. Lee shouldn't be not have a job in the South. You know? I mean, but I get though, but that undergirds this German adoption, because a lot of those scientists were also German scientists doing those same experiments, trying to hybridize apes and blacks because they were lower forms, and they had fully accepted that in Germany based on the science with Darwinian / neo-Darwinian science of we've all, and
that undergirded a lot of Mengele's experiments on twins and that whole thing. It was just an insane thing.
So these laws weren't adopted in a vacuum at all.
They weren't. But I just remember what Martin Buber said. Martin Buber said, he says, we had different relationships between I and thou. I and thou are shoulder-to-shoulder relationships, relationship that you have with people. And he goes, it's things, I and thous, or I and its. He says, you cannot do to its things what you do to people. And what you're emphasizing here is they did not see blacks as people. They saw them as things to be used, things to be discarded, its, if you will. So
they were lower on the evolutionary scale, therefore they could be, experimented on. The Tuskegee experiments, famously.
Exactly.
No different than a lot of the German experimentation.
That's exactly right.
And so I think the author, Whitman here is right in seeing this correlation, because they had adopted, the Darwinian view, which developed in the United States, predominantly can be popular here. They adopted that from us, so adopting our laws that were rooted in those sort of beliefs wasn't that far off.
Right.
But I think that subtlety he mentions here about how the law says one thing, just remembering that it's Democrats who were doing this at the time. I think it's important, because we look at, like today, people will talk about Trump, and he's, they say, oh, he's sending these subtle signals,
dog whistles
to the crew, to his crew, that he's a racist by saying things like, we're going back to make it great again, like the past, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Even though Bill Clinton used that same terminology. It doesn't matter. But I think the reason they know that's such a soft issue, we can make hay with that,
a sore issue,
is because it happened historically where there were laws, but there were all these sort of subtle ways that racists did manipulate and ignore the law essentially.
Sure. Well, they created a subset of laws through which they tried to re-enslave blacks again. But the very interesting thing is, and I have this conversation with a friend of mine consistently. If we do not apportion blame where it belongs, we'll never actually have justice, because the people who commit the crimes continue to go free.
Yeah.
And when I look back at history like the things that we're talking about, if you buy the book and you read it, you'll be disgusted. You'll be disgusted because here's a group of people who've determined in their minds and determined in their hearts that they were going to deprive this other group of people, or these other groups of people, freedom. They were going to deprive them status. They were going to deprive them of their humanity if they could.
Yeah, they dehumanized.
Exactly. So that And it was because they saw themselves as you said, greater or further evolved or more important. I would say to you, when you look at the platforms, or at least the platforms are the expressed ideas of these people, whoever these people were. The political platform is their expressed idea. This is what they believe. You will find that today, the same people who want to deprive you of agency, in other words, that you matter and that you're valuable, the same people who want to deprive you of status, in other words, they believe in something called etatism, which means that the state is absolute. The state is all that matters. Mm-hmm. The state is the over and above everything. Yeah. Those people today are reflected in these people in the past. They're having the same ultimate ideas. They may not be expressing them the same way.
Yeah, but they would outwardly reject. Oh, we're not racist.
We're not racist. No, not at all.
Policies,
but their policies ultimately are,
and essentially dehumanized because it makes the state the grantor of rights as opposed to rights inherent to the nature of the individual.
Right.
So anytime you get that, it essentially dehumanizes. You'll like this. This is the next quote because this gets to that point about what sort of see, because the things we think, the laws we think are racist are not. Mm-hmm. It's the ones that we think are sometimes for our benefit that are used by the racists. Let's look at this quote. This is an interesting one. I'm surprised he says this so directly because I've heard this argued by many, many people before, but it's always rejected because it comes from conservative ideas. Mm-hmm. This is a Yale law professor.
Who's a progressive.
Who's a progressive guy. Comes from him. And this is earth-shattering because of that source. Because people only, validate, the source, the logical fallacy of rejecting an argument based on the source. Well, this is
genetic
a source.
Fallacy.
Yeah. So here's an interesting one. He says, American courts, as German authors were aware, were capable of delivering matter-of-fact holdings such as, quote, the mixing of two races would create a mongrel population and a degraded civilization. By the way, that a mongrel population was a terminology used by Darwin himself. Talking about it just was referred to anytime you get race mixing between whites and
you don't have a pure
whites. You don't have a pure race,
right?
And although Darwin was opposed to slavery, he still used these terms of mongrel populations. Mm-hmm. So it's very much a quote unquote scientific word, if you will, mongrel populations. The degraded civilization. The American Supreme Court entertained briefs from southern states whose arguments were indistinguishable from those of the Nazis. And southern racists like Senator Theodore Bilbo, not related to Baggins.
Not related to Furrier.
Staunch supporter of the New Deal. Mm-hmm. Okay, so here you have the southern Democrat racist, strong supporter of the New Deal. So, okay, if people know what the New Deal, just real quick, what's the New Deal? What's the essence of our perception of what the New Deal is?
The New Deal came about in the 1930s. Remember, the Depression happened, and this is how I think about it. Depression happened in 1929. If rich whites were jumping out of city buildings in New York City, which was a common affair in the Depression, it was just common. People were just jumping out of their windows, and poor whites could barely make it. So much so that the government had to offer soup kitchens and everything else. How did poor black and brown people in America make it? Well, the government came along, this is Roosevelt, with a new way, a new approach of...
By the way, Roosevelt, just to point out as well, the main guy he had helping him set up the national park systems was also the guy involved in having Otobenga...
Oh my gosh!
A part of the Bronx Zoo.
That's nice.
Because Roosevelt had the very common scientific view that blacks were just for the sake of connecting that point. Mm-hmm. Roosevelt was close to that and a supporter of some of that human zoo stuff. I mean, at least through the people by proxy. Sure. I mean, not that he personally signed off on that, but.
Oh, he wasn't opposed to it. I mean,
that was his. I mean, that was the people he had, the scientists who he appointed to the national museums and the other places where those. Anyway, so I just wanted to make that connection.
It's very interesting though, because this is what you're saying is important because most people don't realize that in order to get the South to come on board with the New Deal, the South pleaded with Roosevelt not to put in anti-lynching laws. As a matter of fact, they would not vote for the New Deal if he put in anti-lynching laws. So again, we talked about those laws that they wanted to have that were off the books that made blacks second-class citizens, intimidate them. Well, anti-lynching laws would have done away with that, which Roosevelt did not support. The New Deal literally changed the relationship that not blacks, but whites and blacks actually have with the state, where you could actually get aid. You can get what are some of the things? I think Social Security is one.
Yeah, like Social Security. I mean, ultimately, like the welfare type systems.
The welfare state
today.
Came into effect in the New Deal. But the crazy thing was, it became available in a way that it was never available before for blacks.
So I want to read this last sentence and then finish that thought, because I know where you're going. But so the main upshot is the New Deal was meant as a financial support system to help those in poverty. And it was built to say, hey, this is going to help our black and brown and our white people, all the poor people.
There's a nice smiley face on it.
Everybody's going to be helped. So then you read this, you say, wait a second. So here's the black racist, segregationist guy in the South supporting the New Deal in the 30s. So he says, and it goes on to say this. He could tell tales of the decay of the races through mixing every bit as wild-eyed as, this Bilbo guy, tell these tales of race mixing, every wide-eyed as Helmut Nichols pleading against the mongrelization and the anti-lynching debates of 1938. A process, he claimed, that had destroyed white civilization over much of the globe. So here's the saying, it's like, here's a guy who believes that race mixing is destroying civilization across the globe, and he's voting in favor of a government federal program that would help black people out of poverty, and so that they wouldn't die of starvation. So why would that happen? I mean, he doesn't really ever clearly state why. He just sort of says it.
He doesn't clearly state why, but all we need to do is look at what happened as a result. Pre-1930s,
it seems counterintuitive.
Blacks voted 99% Republican pre-1930s. From 1932 to 1936, blacks began to vote Democrat. From 1932 to 1936, blacks began to vote Democrat, 92% for blacks voting Democrat. And it seems counterintuitive when whites in the South were the most racist, and the people who they were voting for were the ones who were enslaving them, taking advantage of them, instituting all these laws, wanting to lynch them. They voted along with those people. And unless you understand the times in the 1920s, late 1920s, early 1930s, and how hard it was, if you didn't have...
For the Great Depression, essentially.
Yeah, right. If you don't understand how hard it was, you will not begin to respect. I mean, the decision that people had to make, it was either starve or get this government aid.
So what was the agenda then? I mean, why would the Southern folk just not let people starve and die them out? What was their goal? Why would they give aid to the people that they believed were subhuman?
Well, it's power. It's always power.
There you go. See, that's exactly right.
It's always power.
And that's so they used government aid as a way to gain control
and power,
to re-enslave essentially the people, because they made them dependent, not on family structures, not on their community of people, but they had to become dependent on the government to provide for them. And once you're dependent on the government, so here's the way I look at it. So think about this: if you get low income housing, you get all these, which eventually became the ghettos of all these things. But what happened in those ghettos? They were able to say, okay, well, we're going to help you. We put all the black people in the ghetto.
Right, segregation.
Segregate them. But though it's not segregation, we're helping them.
Yeah, we're giving them low-income housing.
We're giving them low-income housing. We're just providing for them. They can't do it. They're poor. They can't. They don't have in their mind, they don't have the mental capacity to handle jobs and crazy stuff. So, we're just caring for them. But what it ultimately got them was the segregation they couldn't get by law, because it was illegal to segregate. Can't have white fountains and black fountains and all this other kind of stuff. You can't segregate legally. So behind the scenes, they pass a law that is, we're going to provide for you.
That seems benign.
Not only do they get the people to vote for them, but then it allows them, under the guise of helping, to segregate them and minimize race mixing, which was their goal to begin with.
What's fascinating about all of this is...
Isn't that crazy?
It's insane. It's insane. What's fascinating about it is Dinesh D'Souza writes these 2 books, Hillary's America, and the one that he's written now, Death of a Nation or the Big Lie. And all this stuff is detailed in this book. And, you think that this guy is just making it up. I mean, there's no way that what you're saying is... There's no way.
How do you feel like even a conspiracy theorist now talking about the New Deal being raised? I sit there and listen to myself like,
no way. But when you actually read what's going on, you actually get real history and not
even just this guy's summary. Read the documents that these
people first what we call them primary sources. Yeah. You read the primary sources and you see that he's not lying. He's not even shading the truth. When he says that when the Nazis took these democratic laws and they were sitting around a table and talking about implementing them, and they said, and the American law says if you had 1 drop of black blood in your family line and you were black, the Germans literally said that that's too racist even for us. Mm. That's insane.
Actually, I got this quote here. This is kind of the next quote. This is interesting. It talks about this. This is,
it's insane.
Well, and plus, I think there's we'll read the quote, but I think there's a sneaky strategy of not making it race-based. Again, being more subtle about the racism.
Right. Well, the Germans were...
So the Germans really, agreeing with you.
Yeah, but the Germans really didn't care because as we read further in his book, he says they were setting up their apparatus before they took the mask off and showed who they really were.
Yeah.
So they didn't really care. They were going to go that way anyway.
Yeah. So here's the thing. He says, but you gotta be slow so you can get more people on, like grooming. You gotta groom them.
You gotta groom them.
You gotta get the masses to buy in.
Well,
you gotta get the masses to buy in.
They did.
So he says this: the question that concerned Klee, another guy writing an article, whether the new Nazi criminal law regime should be race based, simply declaring the separation of the races, or racist, declaring the superiority of some races and the inferiority of others. Some Nazis have suggested that the new law should be purely race-based, avoiding any claim that Jews were inferior. Mm-hmm. They argued would improve Germany's international public relations. Klee rejected that approach. The plain truth, he insisted, was that the German people were convinced that the Jews were an inferior race, mm-hmm. and German law should say so openly. Here, Klee believed that Americans offered a valuable model. American race law, he argued, was unquestionably founded on a belief in racial inferiority. Like the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education, Klee had no doubt that the Jim Crow was designed to dramatize the inferiority of the black population.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you were talking about there, that whole idea that, hey, do we make our law overtly racist or not? And he's, and some argued against, some argued for it.
The Nazis ultimately made it overtly. But you see...
Because he thought that the Americans led that way with the Jim Crow laws.
Right, but you see, though, how being subversive, the effects last longer.
Yeah.
Because there's always a seed of doubt. And what I mean by seed of doubt, there's always a seed of doubt that Roosevelt was really trying to help black people. Mm. You can always make that argument because ultimately... if you're starving and this guy gives you food, he helped you.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, because he was less racist than other people.
Right.
I mean, he didn't want...
So ultimately you can...
He didn't believe in slavery.
Right.
But he believed in black inferiority.
But ultimately you could press that point to make the case that, this is all hype and exaggerated. I mean, there's similarities and but that's what I'm getting at. There's the seed of... There's always that seed of doubt that some person can press. But the reality is what happened. Mm. These policies in the New Deal were radically destructive to black people. Yeah. Radically destructive to black people.
And he just says that American race law, he argued, was unquestionably, this Klee, founded on a belief that racial inferiority. Well, where did that belief come in racial inferiority? Again,
that's Darwinism.
It's Darwinian, natural theology, natural anthropology, really, but a rejection of God as well. But ultimately, there were many theist Christians who accepted this as well because they used science, the scientific consensus was what they allowed to dominate their worldview and their interpretation of Scripture, because they didn't look at the Scripture, which said that there is dignity and sacredness in all human beings, regardless of what that is.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to make that argument right now, but they came up with all these other ways of reinterpreting the Scripture through the scientifically dominant view of the day, which argued that blacks were on the lower scale of evolution, and had to be either, whether it was, sort of the nanny state view of, well, we're just here to take care of them. I don't think they should be tortured or beaten.
What's fascinating?
To take care of because they're inferior.
You know what's fascinating is when you go back and you read Greek history, which you have to do in all your philosophy classes, and you read their ideas, you walk away saying that these men were caught up in a particular cultural milieu. This is the way the people of the day thought. And when you hear people say that, you don't really want to listen to them, because what you think they're doing is explaining away that this person was, a slaveholder, or was a racist, or was whatever. But it's not really what I'm doing when I say these were the people of their day. What I'm trying to get at is that we need to look at people in the context and the times in which they live, and we need to ask questions about is this person more evil than even the people of his own times, or is this person's ideas, do they fit squarely within the mean, the regular thinking of people in their own time? And and we understand this biblically that there's a progression, that takes place from of revelation, how God rolls out revelation from the beginning to the very end. There's a progression. He doesn't roll it out all at one time. And even when we think about people, there's a progression of how we begin to think about man. And there are ideas in the day that need to be overcome, that are not always overcome immediately. I mean, it's easy for us today to sit back and look at these guys and say, well, you should have done X, and you should have done Y, or you should have been X, and you should have been Y. And it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way with people at all.
Yeah, well, and the other problem is we do so often because we just take for granted our cultural consensus,
right,
as the way everybody should have consensus. So, but here's the problem. That's what the people back in those times did as well. They looked at the consensus of scientists. They looked at the consensus of the politicians,
right,
and they said, this is our moral standard. So they were people of their day. Just like we happen to be people of our day, who we say, oh, all those things are bad, they're wrong, or whatever. But more often than not, there's no moral foundation for having that ethical worldview, except that it's the majority opinion.
Exactly.
And that lies the problem, because it's not just enough to analyze like he does here. Mm-hmm. So far, what I've seen pretty well, that things like the New Deal were, supported by Democrats in the South. This is exactly the point he says there. The early New Deal did its work in political dependence on Democratic Party that ruled in the South. So things like the New Deal were meant to create dependence on a political party so that party could enact something that wasn't necessarily popular, segregation, by doing things that were popular, trading on popular beliefs of black inferiority.
Exactly.
But think about, go ahead now.
Think about this. If they had the power, they would have done away with blacks.
Exactly.
If they had the power.
Which is what that Klee dude in Germany was arguing. He said, look, why do we need to hide it? Everyone already agrees that Jews are inferior, so let's just be open about it.
And they were.
He's saying, we'll get more favor that way.
Right.
Because we're appealing to the majority opinion.
Right.
So don't hide it when you already get the people on your side.
Right. And the reason, and here, the country isn't all on these guys' side. So if you understand what I'm getting at here, what they're literally saying is, we can't be open about wanting to destroy all blacks, because if we could, we would. But since we cannot destroy them, we'll re-enslave them a second time. Yeah. We'll use them for political power. That is exactly what they did. And we'll keep them segregated or separated from us, for as long as we can.
And this is, I resist the political thing to make it seem like, I'm advocating for one side today in modern politics more than one another. Because I think both sides have got their serious problems. Both
sides have problems.
But here's the deal. This is my problem with what goes on with the Trump is a racist card. Mm-hmm. I mean, Trump is puts his foot in his mouth. He's a buffoon more than not in the things he says. I'm not defending him. I'm not saying his is. And this is the thing. It's not a binary choice. Trump or the opposition. That's what's being done to us.
That's the false equivalence.
What people are telling us is you have to choose him or the other side. But what the other side is doing, they're taking these sort of historical, soft, tender issues. They're using it to throw against Trump to manipulate the population in general, so that they can again keep people under the one party. What the Democrats did in the 30s is what they're doing right now.
And what's really
just
crazy
manipulating the masses through something that sounds good.
What's really crazy is,
I mean, that's...
And I realized this with President Obama, because I wasn't a fan of President Obama, but I realized probably in about year 7 of just not liking him, that, you know what, I better, it's been 7 years this guy's been president and I haven't listened to him. And I've let the other side really define him. So I said to myself, I need to stop letting the other side define him and listen to him. I still came out with the same answer.
Yeah.
I still did. But my view of him wasn't nearly as harsh. Because I'll tell you, there's 2 ways to skin a cat. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Not that we should be skinning any cats. It's really hard.
No animals are harmed.
No animals are harmed with that statement. But people are going to have a different economic perspective. They're going to have a different political perspective, and we ought not demonize them on the basis of our differences. And that's what the parties tend to do to the other party, is they demonize them without really getting at the real analysis of saying, you know what, I understand, I'm not going to try to demonize you and call you un-American or whatever, but here's what I think about your ideas. Your ideas are going to lead us in that direction, and it's going to have these results and these consequences. And because these results and these consequences lead away from freedom and lead toward bondage and ultimately destroy the unity that we have in our country, I can't accept that. I mean, we need to make rational arguments in that way rather than emotional ones. Yeah. And the emotional arguments are the ones when they say Donald Trump is a racist. Look, I'm not a Donald Trump fan in the sense that I didn't vote for him. I mean, I can honestly say that, and these guys will tell you I did not like him. But the more I listen,
a staunch anti-Trump guy. We had many arguments.
I was never Trump. I was never Trump before never Trump was never Trump. There's no way. But I'm going to tell you, as I listen to him, does the guy make crude comments? He absolutely does. Does he make inexcusable comments? He absolutely does. But he's consistently crude, and he's consistently making inappropriate statements to everybody, which tells me he's not a racist. He may be an idiot. I don't mean to call the president an idiot.
He's certainly a narcissist.
He may be
I think
all
most
that.
of it's narcissism. He's got a lot of pride.
Right.
I think he just does it because he's got to elevate himself.
But I'm going to say this. You know what I admire about him more than any politician in 30 years? That guy will bring it to your front door. That guy, I mean, I'm from Philadelphia. You admire guys that will say what they have to say to your face. You admire guys like that.
Face, that's for sure.
He will say whatever he has to say to your face. I'm not saying that it's good.
And that's what
I'm saying he don't care.
But see, at least we can learn this from history too. Like the Southern Democrats in the 30s were the most racist, vile folks in terms of their views.
No getting around
on everything. Yet they were very slick politicians.
Very.
Because they aligned themselves with the New Deal, and they promoted the New Deal because they knew it would, and they got the blacks who they hated to vote for them.
Right. At the time where they were the most wicked.
And at the
people think that the 60s were when they were the most wicked. No, the 60s is just Alabama and Mississippi. They were bad. They were wicked. But before that, they were even worse.
It was more pervasive.
It was way more pervasive. It's insane.
And that's the thing I think we're not learning from this today.
And the thing that's really insane to me is that the people who were sicking dogs on you and fire hoses and police you're voting for those people.
Yeah, it's not, I wouldn't even use the word Democrat today to be equivalent. It's the progressive side of the Democrats. I mean, if you look at like where the Democrats were, say, in the '70s, the Kennedy sort of Democrat people, I'd probably be closer to that than I would other things.
You're talking about a classical liberal.
Yeah, classic liberalism.
Right.
Classic liberal. I probably would fall within that in some aspects of what I do.
Would.
I mean, it'd be conservative.
You're probably totally liberal.
Yeah, I'd be moderate conservative in some places, classically liberal.
Probably totally liberal.
I don't know. It probably just depends on some of the issues.
You're probably totally liberal.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of piggy.
Yeah, I know, right?
But
the thing is, these people took the promise of something good and they used it to manipulate and harm.
Yes.
And that's what I think is, to me, when the charges levied against Donald Trump that are levied against him, it's always in the thing that, hey, he's going to take away something.
He's going to do something.
He's going to do something terrible.
He's going to bring in the dictators.
Give you something else.
But the thing is, it's always in terms of what's going to happen. He's going to do this. He hasn't done any of that. He hasn't shut the press up. I mean, goodness gracious, over 200, press agencies today wrote something bad about him. I mean, that in itself is worse than anything he's ever done.
There are no invasions of the press corps. And
how is it that all these press pages all think the same?
I'm popular today.
Know, right? How is it that they all think the same? There's not one of them that have a difference of opinion. They all think the same way. Yeah.
My daddy's calling. Dad, I'll call you right back after.
Dad, that's your dad?
Yeah, my daddy's calling.
Ain't that awesome? That's pretty nice.
Nice.
But the point is, and so here's the question that we got to get to. People will say the Democrats of today are not the same Democrats from the past. They're not. People will make that claim, and I'm going to tell you, they are.
In terms of policy, I think that's true.
Not in terms of their overt racism. They're not. But in terms of their policy, there's no difference.
It's the same. The New Deal policies, all the ones that give the state power over life.
Here's the thing.
It's all dehumanization. It's all taking away the sacred nature. It all denies the sacred nature of human beings. And that's where destruction happens. And it does it in two at least specific ways. Maybe there's more you can add.
Oh, I'll add some.
The first specific way that it takes away is because, again, like I said before, if your rights are given by the state and not inherent to you by God who created you,
what the state giveth,
what the state gives, the state can take away.
Right.
So that's one way there, because they assume that the rights are provisions of the state, not inherent to the human individual. And that leads to the second one. All of these policies today on the Democratic platform side, now maybe not individual Democrats, again, whatever, all the caveats we can throw in there, but the platform-wise, what they do is they make value and dignity, all those things are at the group level, not at the individual level. So you gain your status because you're affiliated with a group. Oh, you're a part of this racial group or that oppressed class or this whatever group. And so as long as you toe the party line, as long as you say what you're supposed to say as a member of that group, you get the rights given to you. As soon as you go against what the majority, what the government says that group is supposed to be, so if you don't act black enough, or if you don't have the right black
Clarence Thomas, Condoleezza Rice,
I mean,
then you're not. Then they get
the radio guys.
Then they get to confer blackness on you and take it away.
Exactly, because blackness is a group status, not an individual status.
Right.
So for them, it's a social construct that they get to determine who qualifies as that thing. So if you hold, because you're not saying at this point, all the party line on what Trump is saying, you've been told you're not really a genuine black guy.
You're not a black guy.
Because it's not based on your skin color. It's based on your political opinion.
I praise God that I don't let these people define me. I mean, you can't tell me I'm not black. I mean, stop it. It's just really stupid.
Yeah.
But that's where we are. That's where we are, and it's very interesting that the very people who want to control your reproductive rights, they say that Republicans want to control your reproductive rights. Republicans just want the baby to have reproductive rights in the future. Yeah. I mean, it's just it's true. That's what the Republicans want. We just want the babies to have reproductive rights. We want them to reproduce. But they can't if you keep killing them. I mean, just saying it.
Yeah. But we've got. That's just the thing is to pay attention to books like this, and I'd recommend. I mean,
Yeah.
there's two books that are one. People can pick up this again. James Whitman, Hitler's American Model. I think gives a good summary so far from everything I've read of some of the how American legal system inspired was adapted and utilized by the Nazis. But the other book I'd recommend would be from Richard Weikart. He's written several books on this, but Hitler's Religion is one of his books. He goes into more the social, religious underpinnings that Hitler had and how they connect with an American, the connection. So he gives it that feel. So this is legal, sort of by Whitman, and Weikart's gives a more religious, theological underpinning for it. But you start to get the sense of how those things come in.
There's a book that's prior to all that. It's called The Peculiar Institution by Stamp. And what he talks about is Stamp. He talks about a lot of what you talked about is how
probably stole it from me.
No, he didn't probably. But he wrote about slavery as an institution. And he brings into bear some of the leading voices of the day, like Ulrich B. Phillips, who dehumanized blacks and thought that blacks were inferior. And he brings about how gives you real insight into slavery and the plantation and how it all worked and why it all crumbled. It's a very interesting book.
Yeah, and so I would say this. There's some good reading, but our goal in bringing up this book and this,
and it's not just to demean the Democrats. I mean. As much and my anger toward them is really, it's deep seated. It's not a hatred, but it's really deep seated. But it's not really even to demean them. It's that I just think, and I think you would agree that the more information that we have, we're better able to assess history, and we're better able to assess what our future is.
Here's the thing: is the Republicans could go easily off the rails just like Democrats did.
Sure.
So it's not about our purpose here is not to say this one party's superior to the other.
Right.
In defending certain charges that Trump is a racist or not does not mean that we follow everything. And everything. It doesn't matter who the person is or the party is. What we're saying is we have to look deeper than all that stuff because our ultimate goal on doing off the cuff and a lot of these conversations we have is this. To restore this idea that it's only within this unique Christian worldview, rooted in a biblical understanding of how we were created by God in His image. Made Adam and Eve in His garden. They lived. They fell into sin, but Christ came and brought redemption through His death and His life. Those specific things demonstrate the inherent sacred worth and value of every human being, regardless of any cultural distinction that we want to make, regardless of political party or racial division or sexual, identity, all those things, all have inherent sacredness. All are loved by God.
Yeah, and if I could
be treated with dignity, and that's our goal.
And if I could reiterate that, I'm conservative in a lot of things, but I do not think, and I will say this, I vote against policies. I vote against certain policies because I don't think that they're righteous. But I don't begrudge people who disagree with me, whoever they are and whatever they believe, to go and vote against me. As a matter of fact, as citizens, I hope that they would exercise their free right to have a say in the way that we run this country, because we don't believe in a theocracy here. I don't believe in a theocracy.
No, it would be destructive to my Christian faith if I tried to legislate my Christian faith.
Exactly. So
it would be
horrible. I think we tend toward more freedom, but we argue against those things that militate against freedom, even if they're ideas that are present within our particular time.
Any policy from any party that dehumanizes, that no matter how lovely it sounds and how positive, like, oh, we're going to feed everybody and do everything, but if that policy ultimately ends up dehumanizing and controlling and putting people under the thumb of the government. See, everybody says, oh, the government should have more power, give it all to the government. I mean, do you really want Donald Trump? If you hate Donald Trump, why would you want him to have more power?
Exactly.
The more when you give power to government, that's not a person.
Right.
That just is a system.
A nameless, faceless
So the system
entity
has power. So 20 years from now, somebody gets voted in. We have no idea who that is. They have that power that we just gave them. And the minute you give those people that much power, you're giving it to every future generation that you don't even know is
you're going to pay. And there's
and
going to be payment. There's a payment at some point.
Centralized power like that always ends up in dehumanization and discrimination.
If you give power to people who want to exalt the state over people, then ultimately that same state will tell you how many kids you can have. I mean, look at China.
Yeah,
they will tell you not only how many kids you can have, whether you can have a boy or a girl. If you were a girl in China, you were killed because the state made it illegal for you to have more than one daughter.
And everybody wanted a son.
Everybody wanted a son. Exactly. So we just don't believe in a strong state in that way. I think that's insane.
Yeah, and so when somebody like myself, and I know it's true for you, like opposes New Deal type policies, or
we're not against helping people. We're against what the policies produce in the long run.
Yeah. I'm for helping people on a localized, individual, and groups, local groups, through Christian groups, through organizations, through non-Christian, whatever, just locally helping, letting our resources go, because it's easier if you have a local group that's giving aid and you find out that local group is doing something untoward. You know, we're helping little children, and they enslave them in their basement.
Right.
To stop that, you just have to stop that one little group. If it's your government doing that and they're in charge of everything, how do you stop it?
You can't stop it.
You can't just say,
unless you vote them all out of office.
So by staying smaller and less centralized power, local communities are better able to eliminate wickedness when it arises.
Right.
And that's the ultimate goal behind that.
Sure. We
want good things to happen. We want people to be cared for and taken care of. But free people to do that.
Free.
Yeah, for free,
yeah.
But we want it not to be done by the government because historically it
always ends bad.
No matter how great. Hitler, if you look at him, man, historically, he came into power at a time when it was like the Great Depression at that point. I mean, there was high poverty, high unemployment.
And Germany was reeling from World War I.
Yeah, they had low reputation among the nations. They were despised. And he came in and promised them that they'd be respected again.
They'd be great.
They'd be great again.
Make Germany great again.
Make Germany great again.
Exactly. Make the trains run on time. You know.
And he did it. He did that all.
That. Right.
He got people working. He got people. He did programs to help people who were impoverished. He got all that stuff, and then he used that power to destroy. So even take like what Trump says. Just because he says the phrase doesn't mean the same. If making America great again means give the government power, that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
If making America great again means decentralize that power, return it to states so that people can have more control of their own lives, then that's a good thing for me. Because it's not the phrase that makes it good or bad. Right. It's the policies that
undergird it. That's right.
And it's rooted in that world. So that's what we need to have is a stronger understanding of where that is. So
agreed.
We probably need to wrap up. That's our summary of this stuff for this week. But any last thoughts, or as I'll go turn it off?
No, I mean, and I'm glad that you added that little postscript, because I often leave these shows thinking that, maybe we're being too harsh. I don't think I'm being too harsh.
Hopefully not too often.
Not too often, but because
Ward is often harsh, but he hasn't been here in a while.
Ward is very harsh, and Corey is just not.
That's why he's not on the show.
Corey's just not good looking. So he's harsh in other places.
Ouch. Oh, man. If it was a radio show, in other words, you're saying he'd be here. Ouch. Send your comments.
Corey has a face for radio.
Morethancake.org/offthecuff. Find Leroy's Hill contact information.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, because I grew up in the 1970s. And I just saw the outworking of so many of these policies in Southwest Philadelphia, and thought that it needed to be different, and still think today that it just needs to be different. It needs to be different.
Well, hopefully we can be a part of helping people recognize that. I'm going to move out of the way here and make this thing.
I'm going to get some aspirin.
Hopefully at our regular Wednesday time slot. And we'll be good. We'll get some aspirin. He'll be a happier guy.